Well, I'd like to think we had a relatively good Secretary of State for a while, and one of the things that we ran on 12 years ago now was to implement a voter ID in Mississippi and have secure elections. That was quite a hurdle. In the first 3 or 4 years that I worked on that, it sometimes passed the House, sometimes passed the Senate, never in unison. And so we were struggling with that. So what I did was we started looking at other states. South Carolina was getting sued. Texas was getting sued. I think they may still be getting sued. I don't know if they've ever gotten out of their litigation. But there were a number of them that were trying to do voter ID, and the Justice Department Civil Rights Division was blocking them both in approval process. Back then you had to get approval from the federal government, and then also under the Shelby case, and then also they were blocking them in legal battles in district courts around the United States. So when I went to look at those cases, I thought, well, the first thing we ought to do is go to Washington and go to the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, which I did, and went up there and went to this relatively governmental nondescript building, and I met Mr. Chris Herron, who had been the head of the Civil Rights Division for a long period. Turns out he was actually an Alabama resident to start. And so Mr. Herron and he had about 7 or 8 lawyers with him, sat down, and I explained to him how we thought we should have a constitutional voter ID in Mississippi. In the interim period, we had gotten a constitutional ballot initiative passed. I had gone around the state to 9 different, we were required to do 5 hearings. I'd done 9 different hearings all over the state, and we had discussed voter ID, and it passed with 62% of the vote. So we were real pleased with that, and then I went to implement it up in Washington. So as I sat with Mr. Herron, I explained that we had this constitutional vote, our people had voted, and that we had this process, and I particularly didn't want him to sue me. And I remember just dead quiet when I said that at that time, and I said, besides, I had to get an ID even to get in here to see you, so I don't see why you wouldn't have one to vote. So that started probably I'd say a year or more process of us meeting with the Justice Department. We would go to their trials and we'd watch their expert witnesses and what did they say. And then I thought it would be really good if we actually knew who had a voter ID when they voted. So we secretly hired Edison Group, who had done all of ABC's work, NBC's. They were the national polling people for the country, and they had done all the elections and projections and whatnot. So I hired them, and I told them, I want you to come to Mississippi, pick out the right demographics, go to the right polling places. Don't tell me where you're going. I don't have any knowledge about it. Go there, take a poll of everybody that comes out and find out if they got an ID. And they did that. And I said, it's got to be absolutely secure. You're to put it in a box. It's to be opened only in front of cameras and everything. Back in New Jersey, it's a New Jersey company when they did that. So they did it in November, and about the first week or second week in December, I got the results. And of course, they were 96 or 97% had an ID when they came to the polls in the first place. That was very helpful in arguing with the Department of Justice. I had actual numbers then, and those, of course, were Republicans, Democrats, race, color, creed, national origin, whatever, was all covered there. So that helped us a lot, and as we worked through that, the Supreme Court threw out the Shelby decision, and they said you don't have to. Section 4 of the Civil Rights, which for those of you who don't keep up with that kind of stuff, was you looked at where we were in 1965, and they judged everything by old statistics on how many people were voting and how many people. Mississippi had made great strides, and we have some of the highest registration numbers in the country here. People actually register to vote. Well, you know, we're in the 80s and 90 percentile. The rest of the country is probably in 70 or 75 percentile. We had high registrations of people to vote based on really the efforts that were made in 65 and 70 with voter registration drives. So we had all of that going, and I wanted to make sure that those people got to vote and they were able to vote. And so we drafted the regulations, and I sent them up to the Justice Department. And we'll close by saying that they reviewed them closely. The Shelby decision came out and said we didn't have to look at Section 4. I didn't need their pre-clearance. And this was something I think that made a real difference. The day that it came out at 9 o'clock in the morning, the Supreme Court gives their decisions. By 10 o'clock, Texas had sent a press release, and in it they said, we're going to ignore anything from the Justice Department, they can all go wherever they told them to go. And we're going on with we're right with our voter ID. We don't need any proof of them, we're going on. By 10 o'clock, I had called Mr. Herron and said, Mr. Herron, this is Albert. I said I wanted you to review our regulations, and I wanted your input. I still want that. I think it's important for us to have a working relationship. I think that helped. They actually gave us a couple of suggestions. We had done something like, several of them, like we allowed college IDs to be a valuable way to show your ID, and a number of other things, how many days you had afterwards to come vote. And we basically drafted those regulations in conjunction with the Justice Department. So that went on until about May, I think the first week in May, and we were having our congressional elections in June. So I hadn't heard from Mr. Herron, so I got a little concerned about it. And so I called Mr. Herron and said, Mr. Herron, I really hadn't heard from y'all. We got elected in 4 or 5 weeks. My people started voting absentee here. I was just kind of wondering, how you doing up there? And he said, I see no reason for me to be in Mississippi before June. I said, I don't either. Thank you very much. And that was the end of that. So we never got sued. We're the only state that didn't get sued. And I think it was because we did our groundwork. We had our polling. We brought them into the process versus just ignoring them. And for years, Texas continued to be sued. And by then, their attorney general was now their governor, Abbott. And he was just on a tear about fighting with them. We never did that. I think it had worked exceptionally well. If you went and took a poll today, Democrats and Republicans, and asked them today, what about voter ID in Mississippi? It'd be higher than 62%, because we have justified that relationship. And I think the integrity of the vote is more important than just that particular card. Well, usually on something like that, there's 2 reasons. You're either uninformed or you're right. In this case, they're uninformed, because we have in a state in Mississippi which has the highest minority population, we have exhibited the fact that we can cast our ballots. We had none of the problems that they've had in other states. That's going on today, actually. We've had none of those issues here in Mississippi. So it's been embraced by everybody, Republican, Democrats, or other, and it's worked. And so while it may indeed be an issue in some other state, it's not an issue in Mississippi. And we had our hearings. Our people voted. We did this correctly. We made plenty of allowances for people to use, everything from tribal cards for our Native Americans to college IDs and all those other things we did that made it a viable way to do it. People who want to prejudge Mississippi or prejudge voter ID ought to just come down here and talk to us. Just go to the polling place today. I just voted. Just go out there and ask those people if they have any problems. We've issued thousands of them free. Voter IDs are free. I mean, you got a driver's license, which is probably 95 or 96% of the people. And then you have other things, that you can get a free ID, and we allowed for, utility statements, those kinds of things to qualify. Those are very rarely used. But we have actually issued voter IDs to thousands of them, and we went so far as to get with Mississippi Department of Transportation. They have a process where they pick you up if you can't get to the doctor, for example. We hired them to pick people up to take them to get an ID. In every county in Mississippi, which there are 90 clerks, there's 82 counties, but there's actually some other county courthouses, we put a camera and a blue screen, and you go in there and you can get an ID for free. At 5 days a week, 8 to 5, and on the elections you can get it on the Saturday mornings. So we made it very easy for people to get a voter ID. When I put all of those out there, I actually did the demographics, and we were like 98% of the people lived within 20 minutes of a place to get an ID, because we were in every courthouse, and of course those overlapped some county lines and stuff. So we got it where people could get an ID, and other states didn't go to that extent, and they probably should have. We've met all the federal guidelines, we met all the federal regulations. More importantly to me, we met the constitutional regulations that everybody voted on in Mississippi. And so those were implemented in a uniform manner across all, as I said, all the parties and everything else. And I think people have absorbed that, watched it work the first year, the second year, the third year, and all of a sudden it's commonplace for us to do it. As you know, we used to vote differently. We voted on tablets after 2005. A lot of things have gone on in the election world, but the voter ID has been assimilated into our society, and it's not going away, and it shouldn't. We have tremendous problems on our border right now with people coming in, thousands and tens of thousands, and depending on who you talk to, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And so again, that is a method that you can show that you're a United States citizen, that you're a resident of the state of Mississippi. And I think everybody's vote should count the same as everybody else's, and that's one way to have that happen.